A very good morning. You're watching World Talks, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. This was not an election for the faint-hearted, but what we thought would be an extended competition between two candidates turned out to be a swift victory for former U.S. President Donald J. Trump. The eyes of the world and Europe were on America on this historic day, as safety and security of the whole region, especially Central and Eastern Europe, to a large extent depends on America. What changes are we to see in the coming weeks and months? What does another Trump presidency mean for the CEE? Joining me now to discuss this is Małgorzata Bonikowska, president at the Center for International Relations. A very good morning, and thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me.
A lot has happened over the last 24 to 48 hours. With Donald Trump at the helm, 47th president of the United States, soon to be sworn in, Central and Eastern Europe, is it safe?
Well, I think as far as the general lines of the political foreign policy, nothing much will change as far as eastern flank. Donald Trump knows Poland, and as far as perception of Poland, I think his administration has a very positive view. And I think also under Donald Trump, we remember that there was an increased number of American soldiers at the eastern flank. So I think as far as that aspect, we are safe. However, it is not a very good news for Ukraine, I think. Ukraine, but also Moldova, find themselves in a very awkward positions because they are not members of NATO. Ukraine has a fully fledged war. And in this regard, Donald Trump differs a lot with Biden. I think he will really try to put the end to this war. Quickly.
By what means? What do you think he's going to do? Because he's been claiming that he's going to take 24 to 48 hours to sort this out, sending the world into frenzy, considering
but of course that's
not
possible. Everybody knows it, and I think he realizes that. But I think there was a sort of a promise he made to end this war. So I think he will focus on trying to talk directly to the Russians, to Putin himself, and try to find the conditions to put the end to this war, which is not a very good news to Ukrainians and also to the Europeans, because of course Europeans have this line, Poland included, that we help Ukraine as long as it needs to get some victory on the Ukrainian side, understood as not letting Russia to win. That's very important, because if Russia has a feeling that they want that war,
they will feel emboldened.
Exactly. So this is a tricky part, and we don't know much about this so-called plan, but we know from what J.D. Vance was telling publicly that there is this vision that Ukraine may become, at the end, a kind of a buffer zone, neutral in between Russia and the West.
So we would go to the idea of Ukraine being neutral, so there would be no talk of actually having Ukraine join the EU or NATO?
NATO, for sure. And European Union, we will see. It may be a part of the deal that Ukraine shouldn't be. Putin was mentioning that he's not against that, but you never know in these current circumstances. I think what Putin will try to do is he will try to use the psychological analysis of Donald Trump's mindset and try to play with that. Russians are very good in these games. So, in other words, we will be a little bit worried about that approach Donald Trump has, very personal, very, basing on his personal skills of negotiating with such authoritarian leaders like Putin, and we don't know what will come out of that. So that's one. Second is, of course, once this is done, sooner or later, it will be a big question mark for the other countries, such as Moldova, which is in a vacuum, and we are all keeping fingers for their pro-European path. Recently, we just had
the referendum.
The elections
and the presidential election was
again won, but in the long run, Russia may not want that, and who knows what will be the talks with Trump. So that's a little bit worrying. And of course, to us, to the eastern flank of NATO or Eastern Front, it is a very big question also what consequences this kind of approach with Russia will bring to us in a longer run, not immediately, but in a few years. We are all afraid that Russians may want to continue using their war machine. 40% of the Russian economy is concentrated on the war right now. They mobilized a lot of people to the army. So it's worrying. On the other side, I believe that in the NATO itself, definitely the rhetoric of fulfilling the financial obligations will be the key. So here in this regard, Poland is a leader, so we have no problem with that. But there are still some members of NATO who don't pay that 2%, the minimum of GDP, which was agreed in Vilnius. So
do you think, sorry to interrupt you, but do you think that this is going to somewhat affect the extent to which America is actually involved in the alliance?
Well, that's the question. I don't think there is any thought in Donald Trump's mindset to suspend NATO in any way. But I think Trump will be very, very brutal as far as putting on the table the question of money. Also because I think in the American interest right now, and it doesn't matter Trump or not Trump, is that they have to focus on Indo-Pacific, they have to focus on China. So I think Europe has to take things in our own hands, I mean.
That was something that I wanted to ask you about. Do you think that Donald Trump is going to pull the money from Ukraine in order to dispose of it in different circumstances? For example, considering the Middle East conflict, considering the Indo-Pacific that you've mentioned, do you think that he's going to do that?
Well, the Americans don't like American involvement all over the world in all these wars, so I think
it's not an easy thing to do.
Exactly, and also Americans voted for Trump for a very concrete reason, I guess. It's just to repair economy and to help them feel that individual family in the US is better off, that they are able to pay all the bills and they are able to, with one salary, for example, take a loan for a house. So all these things, inflation included, you know, the situation that Americans see a lot of homeless people on the street. So this is the priority. So the money should go much more into the domestic needs. And then as far as international, I think Americans understand, and Trump included, that America is a leading country in the world. So I wouldn't expect America to let's say, close itself into just internal problems. However, America has to prioritize. So it cannot be everywhere in the same, you know, with the same engagement. So I think for the American interest is to focus on Indo-Pacific and China. And this is why the packages of help for Ukraine, that was the problem even earlier, that the Republicans were blocking this amount. So I don't expect a complete zero, but I would expect the tendency to reduce it, with the same time talks with Russia to finish off this war, not necessarily, you know, on the conditions with the Ukrainians would like.
How do you think the landscape could possibly change in Europe politically in relation to that choice that Americans made, choosing Donald J. Trump as the 47th president of the United States, considering that, for example, Viktor Orban, he was the one to be in contact before the elections. He was trying to foster this friendly relationship with Donald Trump. Do you think this is going to change his position in the European Union, especially in the context of the EU rotating presidency and the European political community meeting, which is about to take place?
Well, I think, of course, Donald Trump's victory encourages all the similar to him politicians like Orban. It's very much like Trump in a much smaller scale. So those politicians who are radical in their rhetoric, those who really have a very tough line and also rule their country in a little bit authoritarian way, we can also presume Donald Trump will try to implement some changes into the American system as well. So in this regard, Orban definitely is seen in a very positive optics. However, Hungary is not really a very important player. So definitely for the American politics.
But it could be considered the enfant terrible of Europe, because they're sitting on the fence with one leg in Russia and one leg in the European Union, wouldn't you say?
So that's what I'm saying. I mean, for the Americans, it's not only Trump, but it's also the institutions in Department of State. It will be a lot to do with the people with whom Trump will implement power, and especially, you know, who will be really his voice in the foreign affairs. But I guess, generally speaking, of course, Trump realizes that Europe could be a very important ally, and in Europe there are leading countries who are number one for the American interests. It's Poland, because it's the largest country on the eastern flank, but it's also Germany. We have, huge also economy here. Germany, let's not forget, it's still the third economy on the globe. And then we have France, who is the only power in Europe with the nuclear weapons. So all that brings me to the conclusion that definitely Americans will come back to the leading partners in Europe. What is, I think, in our interest, which would be very difficult to have, is to keep unity, to keep kind of a one voice in crucial issues. But I think in this regard, you are maybe a little bit right. The wave is with the populists, the wave is with the right-wing parties. So in this regard, these kind of politicians could be a bit more heard. And maybe their position will be taken into consideration much more in the European core.
You mentioned unity, you mentioned Germany. I mean, with everything that happened over the last 24 hours, with Olaf Scholz, who decided that he's going to sack his finance minister, and his coalition ever so slightly falling apart, and probably having to call for another election. Do we have unity? And is this choice of Donald J. Trump in America, this transatlantic choice that was made outside of our control, do you think that it's going to actually wreak some havoc in Europe based on what we're seeing so far?
Let's just be very open. Europe is not a state. We have in the European Union 27 different countries. We have a lot of things in common, but not everything. And of course, in every European country, you have different government. So there is nothing new that in every European state, sometime, there are elections. Every year, even half a year. So people vote, and in Germany, that's obvious, we'll have elections next year, and most likely we'll have a change of power. But let's not forget, the international relations are about states, about countries, not about only the governments. So it will be, in any case, Germany will remain an important European country for the US.
So you wouldn't consider this situation that's taking place right now as a sign of instability of any sort?
Well, it is unfortunate for the European Union that the strongest European countries have political issues right now. Germany, but also France. In this regard, Poland looks like quite stable, but even us, we will have presidential elections next year. We have a clash between the government and the president, so not everything is going well. So that's unfortunate that the European Union is going through such many political issues inside. It doesn't help to build the unity inside the bloc, and while in the same time it is very much needed, especially because of the reality, which is not very favorable for the European project at all. We have a very unstable international environment, and we have enemies. We have strong enemies like Russia, who we don't know what they can do. So in this regard, I think in the European interest is to work, whoever is the president of the United States, to work closely, to keep our transatlantic relations good, intense, which is not easy right now neither, and try to also maybe divide responsibilities and help European Union to build its own strength. Don't forget, European Union was not a project for hard power. European Union was an idea to create a wealthy Europe, to rebuild Europe at the beginning, and then to create a single market, and all that it was achieved. But now we face a lot of political issues and international problems. So in this regard,
we will have to put a stop to this here now. Let this unity and hard work that you mentioned, let that be the way to solve those problems. Thank you so much, Małgorzata Bonikowska, President at the Center for International Relations. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. And so this would be all for now here on World Talks. Please stay tuned here on TVP World, as in just a minute we'll bring you more news and features.